Managing a Software Engineering Department with Ted Neward.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm serving companies that are building mission-critical software systems. Quick announcement, we are in the second year, almost 2.5 years, of my architect forums. There's a sign-up link in the show notes here, but if you lead a software team and are looking to collaborate with peer architect leaders, just sign up at the link in the show notes. This is for you. We realize there's plenty of educational information and professional development information for software engineers and how to write code, how to use technology A or technology B, but not so much for people who are leading groups of engineers. So this is a peer forum that I facilitate, and anyone in that position is welcome. And for those who are looking for my Programming with Palermo video podcast, you can just search for it in any of the directories and you'll be able to find it. Now, my guest today on the show is Ted Neward, and he's sometimes referred to as the Dude of Software, owing to both his remarkable and some say frightening resemblance to the Jeff Bridges character from the Big Lebowski, and his ordination as a Dudeist Minister of the Church of Latter-day Dude. But he's also been called Dr. Gregory House of Software, owing to his tendency to pull no punches when talking about software and how to deliver it successfully. He's comfortable answering to either title, as well as a few others, and he's familiar with more programming languages than most people knew existed and hasn't found one yet that he couldn't turn into a mission-critical application when asked. And he's also the author of several books that you can find online. But Ted Neward, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine, Mr. Jeffrey. How are you doing?
I'm great. Good to see you. We saw each other, 2 months ago at the MVP Summit in Bellevue.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
That's one of the nice things about living up here in Redmond is, every year or so, modulo the pandemic, of course.
Yeah.
All the MVPs descend upon East Side Seattle, and I get a chance to go hang with my friends for, a couple days.
Right. And that's one thing, and I guess I'm speaking to a lot of the young programmers now, is just going to conferences, whether they be regional or national or whatever. Over the years, you meet people, you kindle relationships, and then you get to the point like you, where you just walk in somewhere and it's like, hey, how you been? Because there's so many people that you just kind of known for years just through work connections.
Well, it's interesting. It's a true story. When I was building out the DevRel team at Smartsheet, this was 8 years ago or something,
Mm-hmm.
I took a couple of the recruiters with me to KCDC, which is the show in Kansas City. And as we were walking towards the area where we were going to set up the booth, literally every 3 steps, somebody was walking up to me and was like, hey, Ted, how you doing? Hey, Ted, how you doing? Hey. And one of the other recruiters, stopped about halfway across the floor. He's like, good God, is there anyone you don't know? Is there anyone at this event that you haven't already met? I'm kind of stopped and I start looking at like the list of speakers. And no, I knew about a third of them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
As in people that I had, gone together, had dinner with, not just we were at the same event, but like first name basis and could talk about family members and whatnot. And it is, you do this long enough and you really begin to understand that it is a tribe, and you really begin to feel that whole, it's a small world thing, right? It's not just that you and I worked at the same company, but it's that we've actually sat down, talked to one another, had dinner together, have connections to the point where if I need to ask you something sensitive or uncomfortable, we can do so. That's like the real power of networking, the tribe and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because it's the kind of thing that you don't really see from the outside until you actually see like somebody who's got a wide tribe, connecting with all their folks.
Yeah.
So it's something I tell my college students all the time, build that tribe, because it absolutely is the best thing. It's what makes or breaks a career, I think, personally.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. And the falsehood that a lot of people told me growing up was, oh, it's not what you know, it's who you know, which kind of cheapens what you know and make it as if it's all about this buddy system. But it's the who you know. I've learned who you know lets you get the what you know out there and giving benefit to more people.
So I was just in Chicago last week for VS Live and was sitting around with, a couple of the speakers, as we often do. And, the usual, so what are you speaking on? So what are you speaking on kind of thing. And one of the things I think that people don't really understand is when you do talks, when you've been a speaker, I can explain my session to another speaker in about 5 to 10 minutes. And the other speaker's like, oh, okay, I get it. Right.
Yeah.
Not so much because we're conveying the same amount of information in some kind of weird, verbal PK zip format, but because frequently it's like, oh, okay, I'm giving you enough that you could go look stuff up if you really wanted it. You could go pursue it. There's kind of that shorthand that goes on. And that is the what you know in many respects. Right now, I've gotten some information and I know where I can go to get more if I need to, because the who you know will often give you the distillation, which you can then, it's like getting dehydrated milk, add water and you have milk. It's dehydrated talk, right?
Yeah.
Add the internet and you've got more information than you could need. And so this is going to be how people will keep track of so many different things, right? If somebody runs across a new programming language, they'll ping me, right? Over Twitter or email or LinkedIn or whatnot. And they'll say, hey, Ted, what do you know about this? I'm like, oh, yeah, basically it's one of these and it does this. And you use it in this situation. And they're like, cool, awesome. Now I know a bunch of things about that programming language and I didn't have to sit down and wade through the docs myself. That's what that tribe, that's what that network can really do for you. And it's a shortcut to helping you with the what you know. That a lot of folks, particularly because programmers often don't understand the value of those social connections, those social relationships, they undervalue the ability to be able to, walk up to a friend and say, hey, I don't know anything about X. What can you tell me about it? Your friend's not going to laugh at you or mock you because you don't know a thing, because they also know that there's things that they don't know.
Yeah.
And, maybe I'm giving away secrets, but this is how we speaker types seem like we know so much stuff, because we have a network of folks that we can lean on. And, so if I need to know something about Git, I call Brian Randall. I'm like, dude, how do you do blah? And he's like, I think you do this or that or the other thing,
Yeah.
So it's a superpower, but it's a superpower that anybody can learn, which is the fun part.
Yeah. And it's a superpower because when other people ask you for answers just like that, you freely give your time as well, just to help other people.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So along with all this conference speaking and whatnot over the years, you've also managed a ton of software engineers and built lots of software. And in today's market, the colleges and any kind of education outfit has been scrambling to try to produce more people who can write code, because the demand for software engineers is just sky high. It doesn't seem like it's slowing down. Even with some of the big companies doing layoffs, the whole industry is still growing, and we're behind there. But we kind of don't have enough people who can effectively lead groups of software engineers and be that software engineering manager, director of software engineering, those positions that really know how things should go, have enough experience to see when something wrong is happening and get back on track. You've done a ton of that. I'd like to ask you about that in your experience. Maybe we can help the listeners, or maybe even some of the listeners can funnel this episode, to their bosses, or maybe even the CEO. So, hey, can you give me a better manager? So what do you think of when thinking of like the biggest lessons that you've learned for running software teams effectively?
So, wow, gosh,
yeah,
Jeff,
softball, right?
Yeah, I mean, talk about questions with yes or no answers. Geez, man, give me something a little more open-ended to work with here. I mean, look, nobody's ever going to, I'm not certainly going to ever stand up and say there aren't bad managers out there, because there most certainly are, right? I mean, everybody's got stories of, and even if you don't personally, which means you're living a very charmed life, your coworkers, your friends, et cetera. I mean, just go on the internet and Google bad management, and the stories just come pouring forth. And part of it, one of the common threads I often find from bad managers is they're often doing it for the wrong reasons,
Hmm.
right? Particularly with yours and my generation, there was this belief that said that if you wanted to advance your career at a certain point, you had to go into management.
Hmm.
If you were going to make, you reach senior developer, you get to architect, right? And that's, I often joke about how architect is basically where programmers go to die. Because once you become an architect, you've reached the pinnacle of the technical pyramid. And if you get promoted, you become managers. And it's unfortunate, but it's a common meme that a lot of companies don't really have a promotion track for people who are, strongly technical and want to stay that way.
Mm-hmm.
So in many cases, people get into management because they feel that they have to, right? That this is somehow the necessary next step in their career. And unfortunately, it's wrong on several accounts. Number one, if you don't really want to do it, you're not going to do it very well.
Yeah.
I mean, just as a given, right? If you are looking at the idea of doing one-on-ones with your team with this sense of, oh yeah, this is what I have to do, this is the price I pay, you're never going to approach it with any degree of joy or excitement or anything like that. And so the first thing I would certainly ask people is, if you're exploring this idea of becoming management, why are you doing it? Right? For me personally, it's kind of an outgrowth of teaching and speaking. I live for that moment when I can see people's faces light up and they get excited. And whether I do that because they're reporting to me or because they're learning from me or what have you, I really thoroughly enjoy making people better than what they were when I found them, right? I still stay in touch with probably half to 2/3 of all the people who've ever reported to me ever, because I enjoy watching their careers grow. And frankly,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's a young woman that used to work for me at Rocket Mortgage who, even though I've been gone for 2 years, 2.5 almost, she still wants to have monthly one-on-ones because she values those conversations and, the teaching, the growing, the whatever I can do, or even just having a sounding board,
Mm-hmm.
right? So really a large part of it starts with what's your mental state when you go into this? Because I've met a number of people who are absolutely nope, nope, nope. I don't want to be management. I don't want to have to deal with performance reviews. I don't want to have to deal with any of this. I like writing code. I just want to write code. And don't get me wrong, I have yet to meet a manager who really enjoys writing performance reviews. I have yet to meet a manager who really enjoys having to hold the team accountable for something. Nobody likes the not fun parts of the job. But a lot of developers really focus on the not fun parts of management, and they lose sight of the parts of it that really is fun, where, for example, I go to the mat for somebody and get them get them the money to go to that conference or get them that
Mm-hmm.
training class they're looking for. Or I see somebody did something above and beyond. And so I go to my boss and say, hey, we need to do something for so-and-so, because where they're not expecting it, right?
Yeah.
There's all these really rewarding parts of management. Just like as a developer, when you write code and it works and it's up there on the screen and everybody can see it and they all start applauding and cheering, yeah, that feels really good. But part of the thing is, as a manager, it's kind of like you're a parent now, right? It's kind of like, it's not going to be that they're cheering for you when your team is successful. They're cheering for your team.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to really be comfortable with, the parent who's on the sidelines watching your kid be successful, rather than you being the one that's being showered with adulation and so forth. And so it really is that shift of perspective, that shift of interest. And for me, I did all the technical things. Like you said, I wrote books, I've written articles, I've given technical presentations, etc. And I still do those things to this day because they're fun. But for me, the real shift was about 10 years ago. I made the very conscious decision to start doing more management stuff because I really wanted to grow teams. I really wanted to grow people.
Mm-hmm.
And starting from there is generally a safe and good place to begin. You still have a lot to learn, but that's really the mindset that begins. So many times when I see these bad managers, it's because they're in it for themselves. They want the power, or they think they're going to get all the glory, or they're going to be able to make all the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going in with that, yeah, you're going to end up in one of those reviews on Glassdoor that ends up becoming a meme that everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, could you believe?" Because you're going at it the wrong way.
Yeah.
It's kind of like people who get into programming because they want to make a lot of money are generally not going to be great programmers, and they're not going to make a lot of money. It's exactly the same flaw, right? So
yeah, it's the wrong order.
It really is. It really is. And, to me, management is really about compassion. It's about being able to look at other human beings and understand where they're coming from. And, I've had conversations with developers who are like, well, I'm not sure if I really want to, go into management. And to be fair, a lot of companies are starting to realize that taking really strong technical people and pushing them into management is not great. And there are people who are interested in it and would like to get better at it. And so some companies are starting to create programs for managers, or would-be managers. But there are also a whole slew of people who are technical, who want to stay technical. And so now they're starting to look at ways to allow those people to continue to grow and get stronger and get rewarded more without having to take on direct reports. And, that's encouraging. That's a, because now we'll start filtering out the people who think they, need to become managers because that's the only way to get promoted at this company.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. I mean, I'm seeing that not just at the Microsofts and Googles, but a lot of companies, including a few that are not tech, quote unquote, tech companies.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's slowly starting to take root, which is good. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing. It's just, you got to want to be a manager as opposed to doing it because you have to.
Right. Right. You mentioned some companies starting manager training programs. That used to be a lot more prevalent, but at the same time, 30, 40 years ago, the average tenure at a job was a lot longer than it is now. I think I saw a number, the average across the United States is 4.2 years total. And then for software developers, it's quite a bit less than that.
Yep.
And so when companies are looking at that, it's not exactly motivating to say, okay, I'm going to train people for management because less than 4 years, they're leaving anyway. So
yeah,
that's
this
decreased.
This is exactly a negative reinforcement loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember reading a study years and years and years ago. I think it was I can't remember, some group. I think it was Association Computing Machinery. They did a survey, and the average for software developers across the industry was like 26 months, right, 2+ years in a single particular role. And as with all things, you have to go back and look at what they were studying. If I transition to a new role inside the same company, does that count? Blah blah blah. But a lot of companies, a lot of managers reacted exactly the way you said. It's like, oh well, if they're not going to stick around, why should I bother training them?
Mm-hmm.
Which then, of course, meant that I really don't have a whole lot of motivation to stick around, which just exacerbated and fed back into this. And a lot of firms are really, especially bigger firms that have some, stable revenue going on, are really beginning to realize that, somebody who's been on the team for 2 years has a lot of domain knowledge, and a lot of that goes out the door when so-and-so leaves. And so a lot of companies are really starting to come back around and say, okay, we want to figure out ways to hold on to people. We really, really do.
Mm-hmm.
because we have, I mean, if you really want, short-term benefit, you've got all these consulting/contracting companies. You can go get the gig developers to go and do these sorts of things. It's not hard. There are a lot of companies that did that and then watched all their domain expertise disappear and wonder why people were having such a hard time working on phase 2, phase 3.
Yeah.
So companies are starting to do this. The other thing that they're starting to realize is management is a skill. It's every bit as much of a skill as your, insert programming language here, insert framework here. It's every bit as much of a skill. And there are lots of people who have gone to boot camps, have gone to college and learned how to program in C#. But now, they're 5 years at the company and they're a senior developer and they've expressed an interest in management. They've never had a management class ever.
Right.
They have no idea. They could walk into the bookstore and find the programming section and pick up a book on C#. And I'm dating myself with that reference there. I totally realize that. But imagine you go on Amazon and start looking for C# books. You know exactly what you're looking for
really,
there.
they're going to YouTube these days. It's like, okay, let me look for a video on it.
But I mean, same thing, right?
Yeah,
There's lots of videos on how to, C# latest and greatest features, but how to run an engineering team. Right. And you are completely in over your head. So a lot of companies are starting to, and this is something I will call Rocket Mortgage out for doing well. They had programs for people who are interested in becoming a tech lead to start going through the basics of what it means to be management, right? Not just, hey, you're promoted, so now you're stuck. Let's give you some materials to help. But literally, if you were thinking about it and you like to try a few things, go through a few exercises, et cetera, which I think is really, really, useful and powerful, particularly because then it also gives people opportunities to see bad management as it plays out in front of them and recognize it as bad management and say, yeah, no, you're not actually supposed to be treating me this way. And here are some that I'm going to go talk to HR because this is not great, right? So this is all good. That said, there's still a lot of folks out there that are struggling. And, this is one of the frustrating things, which, as you know, because you and I have talked about it before, I've been looking for roles as engineering management for the last couple of years. And, I keep running across situations where, they're like, yeah, this would be great. We'd love to have you. And then something structural pops in and it's like, oh, yeah, it turns out we missed our revenue targets or we're being acquired or, the person that I'm working with suddenly jumped ship and went to a different company. All of these are things that have happened, right? And then you talk to developers like at conferences. It's like, oh, yeah, my gosh, I would love it if my manager would do all of these things. And I'm like, well, then talk to somebody. I'll be happy to be your manager. Yeah. Because it's one of the frustrating things that, my dad many, many years ago used to say that there are two kinds of people in the world, those who can get jobs and those who can do jobs. And the Venn diagram often doesn't overlap. I'd like to think I'm firmly in that category of those who can do the job, but in terms of how to get it, I'm feeling mighty low right now. It's been a struggle. It really has.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery.
ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
Well, there's so many companies that I've come across where they've hired a number of developers, and those developers just end up getting assigned to whatever executive happens to be available, or just like, I don't know, the eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I mean, I've seen one of our customers was a multi-billion-dollar company, and they only had a few developers because they were in, another deep into logistics and whatnot. And that group of developers just reported to one of the top tier executives who was over a completely non-technical function, but they just picked somebody. So they effectively did not have a manager at all, except for just maybe a distant bit of oversight, from a disconnected perspective. So I think there's so many companies out there that haven't been doing custom software for decades. They're new to it, and they started with hiring a programmer, and then two, and then a few more. And that's kind of where they sit.
And there's a line there. There's a tipping point, right? Because when I was a CTO of a consulting company, we ran across a couple of those firms too, right? Where you hire, the classic story is you hire like your cousin's kid who happened to take an HTML class in high school. So you had them build the website, and then they discovered PHP, and now they could start doing stuff to the database, and so now, whether you realize it or not, you now have an IT department, and it's your cousin's kid, right? And
hey,
sure,
we weren't going to talk about my story. Stop that.
Hey, are you the cousin or the kid or the guy who hired it? Never mind, we won't go there. I mean, this is a classic story, right? For all these small to medium businesses out there who know they need technology, but they have no idea how to get started. So they get started with the most obvious thing, but let's build us a website.
Yeah.
And slowly over time that grows, and then you start running into some of the issues. At a certain point, there's a tipping point where, you need to hire a full-fledged IT department. But again, just like that programmer who got promoted into management and has no idea where to go to find material, that CEO or that business owner has no idea where to go to hire people. And so they might throw out a job description on LinkedIn and get swamped with several thousand resumes, all of which are completely incomprehensible.
Mm-hmm.
Or they'll go to somebody they know who happens to be in tech, or they'll go to that programmer that they hired. They'll go to the cousin's kid and say, well, I think you're the VP of IT now. And this cousin's kid who's like 25 now is like, oh, okay, why? Well, you've been here the longest and you've seen everything that we've done. So you seem like the logical person to make a VP of IT. And, I mean, red flags are popping off all over the place right now at this, but they're literally doing the best they know how.
Sure.
Because they don't have access to the tools, they don't have access to the people. And then at some point, they start running into issues. They start doing some Google searches. They run across a consulting company, et cetera, which unfortunately carries with it its own share of risks, because now you've outsourced your IT, and, there's all these anti-patterns out there. There's all these traps that people can fall into. And unfortunately, as much as we have all these coding boot camps out there to pump out people who can write code, we don't have camps that pump out management, because it turns out you don't need an MBA to be a manager.
Yeah.
You really don't need to have attended Harvard Business School, et cetera, et cetera. But trying to find people who are capable of running that team, it's hard. I have nothing but sympathy for those folks. It's hard. And frankly, if you're at one of those companies, if you're on one of those teams and your CEO is struggling, I mean, have some sympathy for the CEO, because they're trying their best. They often don't know what they don't know. And so it's hard for them too. But, if somebody's listening and it's like, oh, wow, we could use this, I'd be happy to take any requests, because
you've done a lot of advisement and consulting work as well for managers.
Oh yeah. I've done that. I've like I said, CTO of a consulting company for several years. Plus, before that, I worked for several other consulting companies whose names you might recognize. Sadly, None of them were clear measure, but we did have a couple of conversations way back when. Consulting companies are good in certain scenarios, but they can't replace a company's IT function, nor should they want to, right? And there's a tremendous amount of stuff to keep track of. I mean, I guest lecture at the University of Washington in Seattle. Go Huskies. And one of the things I frequently have to remind my college students is that nobody knows everything, because they go through a couple of classes, they start feeling like they're pretty good at this programming thing, and then kind of like in the martial arts dojo, you at a certain point you get your black belt, and that's when the sensei has to bring you up on the mat and throw you around the mat to remind you that no matter how much kung fu you know, there's always somebody who knows more kung fu than you. There's always more to learn. And now imagine that you're the CEO of a company, you're focused on thinking about P&L statements and managing inventory and dealing with the people. And, oh yeah, by the way, here's this huge technical space that you need to be aware of as well. I have nothing but sympathy for folks who are, not technical, in the same way that I hope they have sympathy for me when I say that I have no idea how accounting works. I just don't, right? When I was at when I was running the consulting company, when I was the CTO of the company, I had an amazing accountant, right? Paulie. And Paulie absolutely took care of all these things to do with payroll and HR and benefits and so forth. And I like, dude, I'm so glad you're here because I don't know how any of that stuff works. I really don't. And that's part of the reason we have that degree of specialization. It's part of the reason why we do have those different roles for the CEO, CTO, CFO, now Chief Product Officer, et cetera. It's hard when you don't have any knowledge in a space to walk up to a complete stranger and say, I trust you. I trust your knowledge. I trust your skill set. And CEO is, they're the captain of the boat. Anything goes wrong, it's their fault. And so, yeah, I feel great sympathy for them. And if I can help them, I'm constantly looking for ways to do that. And frankly, to me, that's the essence of what a consulting company should be, or what the CTO should be doing as a partner or VP of engineering or whatever role you care to name. So
now, you've given some good advice for management on the people side, because you obviously have to get good people, you have to retain them, you have to grow them. But what should managers, before we kind of run out of time with this episode, what should managers be thinking about just from how their software teams are working? Because they have to ship software, and the software has to be good. It has to do what it's supposed to do. So are there any kind of rules of thumb that you found to be constant from company to company, industry to industry on that perspective?
So a lot of where I'm going to go with this is really going to be more in the nature of asking questions. I'm something of a philosopher, right? Which is, in keeping with the dude, because the dude is the world's biggest Stoic philosopher. Part of what philosophy does is it's becoming comfortable with questions, right? So in the case of being an engineering manager, one of the questions I would challenge every engineering manager, and by the way, if you're a team lead, you're a manager, right? If you have people reporting to you, if you have hiring and firing authority, you're a manager. Right? I don't mean that, manager often is spoken of in like negative terms. I mean that you have authority, you have responsibilities, you are responsible for the output of the team as a whole, right? So if you're a manager and you are held, you're the one who gets called into the boss's office if the schedule is, running behind, et cetera. Congratulations, you're a manager. What does success look like for this team? Literally, what does it look like? What does success look like? If it means shipping a particular thing on time under budget, okay, cool, right? That tells us two of the metrics by which you can judge your particular success. That's just two of. Those aren't the only metrics, right? But really, it begins with, what does success look like for this team? And If this is a conversation you've never had with your boss, well, then guess what you're going to need to do in your next one-on-one? You're going to need to walk into your boss's office and say, hey, boss, what does success look like for this team? Because frankly, if you don't know how to answer that question, there's no way you could be successful except by pure accident, right? But success also carries with it a bunch of other things because, for example, the relative happiness of your team is a metric. It's harder to quantify, but it is definitely a metric. And so we can look at the budget, we can look at the schedule. The schedule, I mean, budget, you know how much you've spent, you know how much you've got left. That one's pretty easy to get precise with. Schedule, well, okay, there's always little fudge factors that go on with respect to that. And we start looking at, projecting and estimating, and there's a whole subgenre of all of that. But how do you measure your team's happiness? Well, that's not exact. I mean, you can't really send out a survey and score points, even though that's what a lot of companies do. This is where the weekly one-on-one becomes absolutely paramount. To me, anybody that is a direct report, we schedule an hour-long one-on-one every week, period, full stop. This is not a performance review. This is not a report of activities. This is literally you and me sitting down and me saying, if you're reporting to me, Jeff, I'm saying, so how you doing, Jeff? What's going on? What's happening in your world? How are things going? I know at one point you expressed an interest in potentially learning a new programming language or, doing a thing, or you had some concerns about the project. Talk to me. Ideally, in a one-on-one situation, as a manager, you will spend maybe a third of the time talking, and the rest of the time will be your report telling you things. There will obviously be times where I need to say things like, hey, this is what's happening, you wanted to request about such and such. Let me tell you what I found from running it up the flagpole, blah, blah, blah. But this is really where you're getting a feel for what your team is feeling, right? And this is just the two of us. So this is, safe space. You can say whatever you want about whoever you want. I want people to feel comfortable to be able to say, this is my way of being able to hear kind of where you're coming from. The formal term for this is psychological safety. You're trying to build a space where I could literally say in a meeting, hey, here's an idea. Now all of you tell me what's wrong with it. Tell me why I'm wrong. And all of you feel comfortable doing exactly that. Because, if I can't brainstorm comfortably, if I can't feel like this is a safe space where we can throw out ideas and criticize the idea, not the people, then you're never going to hear the bad news until it's absolutely too late to hide it, that we're wildly behind schedule, et cetera. So a large part of what I do is try to build that psychological safety. And a large part of that is weekly one-on-ones, as well as a weekly team huddle where I get everybody on the team together in the meeting. And we spend about half the time going over business and half the time just fooling around. If we were in person, this would be a lunch. I would take the entire team out to lunch somewhere and we would just, talk shop for a bit, but also just let people chat and get to know each other, et cetera.
Yeah.
Those are all metrics, and that sense of how the team is feeling is every bit, if not more important than the schedule and budget. Because if the team is grooving, if they feel comfortable with each other, they will start to they'll start to hold themselves accountable. True story. At one point, I built an engineering team at Smartsheet completely out of boot camp graduates. I take it back. The team lead was a veteran who'd been at Smartsheet for several years. And we had one person who had more than a year's worth of experience. He had 2. The rest of the team of 8 people were all less than 6 months of experience, most of whom had done a recent JavaScript boot camp kind of thing. We hired them in March. They delivered the application in October.
Nice.
And when we started this, I started basically a book club to help them come up to speed on JavaScript because that's what we were using. Because, you learn a little bit about it in a boot camp, but, not to a quote unquote professional level.
Right.
And after a month and a half of that, the team came to me and said, okay, we want to shut the book club down. I'm like, what? What do you mean? You want to shut the book club down? They said, we are collectively a little concerned that if we keep up with the book club, we're not going to have enough time to hit our deadlines. I said, okay, you know what? This is your team, right? If you want to make this decision collectively, and I, one-on-one with the team lead, I said, hey, are you sure? He's like, nope, the team approached me. This is not me doing this. This is the team doing this. It's like, okay, this is what you want to do. Then go for it. They owned it. They owned that thing and they wanted to see it ship on time.
Mm-hmm.
It did. And so when you have a team that feels comfortable coming to you and saying, yeah, this is what we think we need in order to be successful, you've built a team at that point. You've built a group of people who really own the thing that they're trying to build. And at that point, managing becomes so much easier because they're going to take care of a lot of those things. They held each other accountable in many ways, such that I didn't have to. And it was awesome. It was great. It was one of the best experiences. When you as a manager start looking for the definition of success to mean more than just we ship a thing on time and you include, the happiness of the team around you, those other things really have a tendency to fall in line, right? So to me, that's probably the most important metric is how is my team feeling today? And if I don't know, if I can't give that answer with a high degree of reliability, I'm probably not doing my homework, and I probably need to get into those one-on-ones. That's the fundamental problem, like you said earlier, where you've got those developers reporting to some random schmo in the executive team because they're not engaging with the team on a regular basis. They have no idea what's going on until disaster strikes.
Yeah, and they've got so many other things. There's no way that one-on-ones are happening at any frequency close to that.
Oh yeah. Exactly. They're getting status reports, which they're never reading. And when the status report, when so-and-so says, hey, by the way, I said in my status report, well, but why didn't you tell me? Because I've been submitting status reports to you for the last 6 months. And every time I kept saying, we're in danger, we're in danger, we're in danger. And you weren't doing anything. So I thought we were okay. Yeah. I mean, that kind of engagement has to be there, which is why having any team report directly into the executive team can be problematic, right? That's why we have VPs and directors to be able to focus, what's happening below them, as well as distill it and be able to signal it up, including calling the CTO and saying, I need time with you because we are about to blow something up and I need your help to avoid blowing it up, or at least make you aware of the fact that it's going to blow up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, I think we could probably take this topic for a whole nother hour. There's so much to dig into here. Gosh. It was just a primer. But as we close up here, if there is, a software engineer out there that's listening that kind of thinks that maybe he's already doing the job of manager, it's just that he's not recognized for it, and is thinking, you know what, I kind of have the chops for it. There's something natural about leadership. You have any closing tips for that person?
So, if you're already in a position where you have people, quote unquote, reporting to you in an informal basis, I mean, step one is if you want to be formally recognized for it, you might have to actually change the company you're at, because those situations often don't resolve themselves normally unless you go to your boss and say, hey, I feel like I'm being a manager. Can we make that formal and make me a manager? That is often a tricky prospect. And sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. But if you've got people reporting to you informally and you're enjoying it, throw your hat in the ring, right? Start looking at engineering management roles, team lead roles. Different companies will have different terminology for it. Some companies, the architect will be the team lead, will be the manager, et cetera. Explore it and be comfortable in the fact that, not all management is bad. Not all management is evil. Some people kind of like sideways into it. Like, well, I I don't want other people to know that I'm becoming a manager, because there's this feeling that somehow you will lose all of your technical ability completely. And that's most certainly not the case. The best managers, the best engineering managers are the ones who still keep their hand in the technology, even though they may not be writing production code on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
It is perfectly reasonable for you to have people reporting to you to not be writing code on a day-to-day basis and still remain technical, because you read books and you follow articles and you listen to various guests on the Azure DevOps podcast and all of that kinds of stuff. But embrace it. Embrace the fact that you now lead people and you are looking to get them to do more than they may have ever even thought possible.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Good tips. Well, Ted, it was great having you back on the podcast to share with us about managing software engineers, because
great to be here.
Our industry needs it.
I suppose I should probably apologize for like making it all about me, but that wasn't really my intent.
No, you're the guest. Hey,
well, I mean, the whole job thing, right? I mean, it's always awkward, right? Saying, yeah, come hire me. But, I always enjoy chatting, Jeff. If people find that helpful, I am happy to have provided it. And
Well, and
I look fun to doing this every time.
Well, let's make that crystal clear. If anyone didn't get the message already, if Ted could contribute to your organization, he's looking to shift from more consulting roles to a full-time manager role. So hey, give him a call. We'll include the contact information in the show notes.
Yep. I would love to talk to people. And frankly, if people are thinking about making the shift to management, I'm always happy to respond to an email, and give people some thoughts to think about. So
awesome. Well, thanks for being here.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.